Also on Capitol Hill earlier today, got the perspective of a Republican in the Senate. Republican Senator Todd Young of Indiana joined me for a conversation earlier today where I talked to him not just about the escalating tension with Iran and conflict with Iran, but also what appears to be the looming expiration of FISA Section 702 surveillance powers. And he's not happy about it. Here's our conversation.
It's an uphill climb at this point. Members are flying home in the House of Representatives. They'd have to be called back in. But more importantly, to lay a predicate for that, Democrats would have to decide that they want to reauthorize this program. This is the program that informs most of the president's daily briefing. It gives us visibility into foreign terrorist activity and other threats to the American people and our friends. And as the World Cup descends on the United States, Mexico, and Canada, starting today, it's pretty concerning to me. It should be to all Americans that these authorities are lapsing.
Well, you say Democrats need to decide they want to extend it. I think many Democrats would tell you they would like to see this extended. Their issue is that the president will not pull back his tapping of Bill Pulte as acting director of national intelligence. Couldn't the president help lead a resolution here?
Well, I'm familiar with the argument. I've spoken to a number of my colleagues, many of whom I respect greatly, and I know are concerned about our national security. But my argument to them is, listen, this is a temporary appointment. Let's reauthorize this essential national security program as an act of pragmatism during an ideological and fractured time to protect the American people.
But
so
could it not
let's
also be pragmatic to just announce a different candidate for a permanent appointment now instead?
Well, I think we could do both. I think we can call on the White House to find someone suitable to Republicans and Democrats alike, someone who has, under the statute, the requisite experience. The statute calls for someone that has extensive national security and intelligence experience. I think we should follow the law. I think the American people agree. So I've carried that message. And so I think I have credibility to argue that the Democrats need to act. Their failure to act here and put a reauthorization on the president's desk is the only thing in front of them. They need to act responsibly.
Well, and you mentioned the World Cup kicking off today. I know you care a lot about that also as a former soccer player at Navy.
Yes.
When you consider the threat that may actually be posed to these major sporting events, is there anything in terms of executive order that the president could do to still make sure at least some authority with the aim of securing events such as the World Cup is still there?
So I'm also a member of the World Cup Steering Committee, and so I have a little visibility into this. And I have to say, almost all of the conversation surrounding the World Cup that emerges from the White House and the executive branch is focused on security. So I know they're pulling out every stop to ensure that the American people and others are safe. But there are some limitations to what they can do. They just will lack the visibility into the threats as they emerge and as they're executed, conceivably, in coming weeks, potentially coming months, if these 702 authorities aren't extended.
Well, and of course, the concern about this is heightened by the fact that we are still dealing with a conflict in the Middle East. Senator, the president has said we will be attacking Iran again today. This would be the third day in a row. He also suggested the U.S. could be taking Karg Island in the near future. Is that an operation you would understand would require ground troops to be deployed? And if he's going to make that decision, does he need to ask you and your colleagues first?
Well, I'm glad that the president is applying more pressure to the Iranian regime. He has tested the regime and their appetite for conversation, negotiation, and ultimately resolution of this war. The president wants a quick resolution. He wants prices to go down. He wants Hormuz open. And he wants the uranium extracted from or otherwise secured in Iran. So all of those things can be accomplished, but unfortunately not until we apply more pressure on the Iranian leadership. So that's his objective with Karg Island. With respect to congressional oversight, I have been incredibly critical of this institution for not exercising more oversight over a war power situation. I think it's created an environment in which Republicans and Democrats alike in recent history, whomever occupies the White House, feel comfortable going ahead and acting without consulting the American people. As we saw with the Iraq War, That creates all sorts of problems if members of Congress aren't asking the really hard questions early on in an exercise. So my hope would be, before any major commitment of American troops to this conflict, there would be not just consultation with Congress, but perhaps even a formal endorsement.
Well, and if it were put to you, would you be supportive?
Oh, I don't know details at this point. I don't know what the trade-offs would be. I don't know what the precise threat is, what the strategy is. They're really basic questions. You know, going into this effort, I would have asked questions maybe about the Strait of Hormuz, for example. So those are the types of basic questions that don't require even a classified setting, where you can stress test plans and you can get buy-in from the American people on the front end.
Do you believe at this time, based on your knowledge and the briefings you have received, that the military course of action is really the only one that can unstick the stalemate we seem to be in? Do you have any hope of diplomacy prevailing here?
I actually don't believe that that's the case. I think we have numerous instruments of national power, whether it's our Treasury Department sanctions, it's trade tools we can use to apply pressure, diplomacy through us and our allies and partners, military action. Historically, the American people, through their government, have done a really good job of bringing to bear the powers that they have. I think there's a temptation to look to the military to solve all of the problems we have, and I think that is a dangerous temptation, and it will not lead to an optimal outcome.
So what about the temptation to throw even more money at the DOD? The president wants a $1.5 trillion defense budget. He is now suggesting some $350 billion should go through the reconciliation process, again, 3.0, to secure more funding for the Pentagon. Do you see a real chance of that happening?
I think I bring some credibility to this issue. The current law now requires the Pentagon to produce a auditable financial statement in the next couple of years. In modern history, they've been unable to do so, yet we continue to shovel money into the Pentagon. Until we have real visibility into where the money is spent and where the waste, fraud, and abuse is in the Pentagon, we can't be credible stewards of the American taxpayers' dollars. So I think that's the first step. But in the interim, I think the administration will need to ask some and answer some tough questions from members of Congress about where exactly the money will go. I will say the one agency that I think is notable where DOGE did not do a lot of activity is the Pentagon. That happens to be the largest discretionary program in our federal government, so I think it's ripe for scrutiny.
So reconciliation 3.0 with more Pentagon money, you would throw a little cold water on that idea?
Well, let's see how it's structured. I mean, it's a time of war. We, of course, need to refill our stockpiles to keep the American people safe and secure. I'm absolutely open to that, spending money on anti-air weapons and other hardware that the American people understand that we need. But let's not waste money. I would also say, if we're going to spend more money, let's think through how we can do so sustainably. We have a massive national debt. There hasn't been enough consideration of the implications of our spending in Washington in modern history, and so let's have that difficult conversation in conjunction with any debates about reconciliation.
And finally, Senator, we're asking everyone this question this week because the president seems very interested in the idea of the U.S. government having some ownership of the big AI companies. He suggests it could bring more wealth to the public, and I wonder if you think that's an attractive idea, if the government should be playing that kind of role in some of these very large companies that could soon be public.
Well, my emphasis is making sure we stay ahead of the Chinese, and the capital is deployed efficiently, that these companies are liberated to produce best-in-class models, because we know the Chinese are also sophisticated when it comes to such things. But we have our own system. And it involves, it's much more heavily emphatic that the private sector needs to lead as opposed to government. In terms of government ownership, the reservations I would have is that government would too strongly steer the direction of these companies in ways that meet the needs of special interests instead of customers. I do think there's a very important conversation to be had about data centers and energy costs and how those are spilled over onto consumers. I think those costs should be internalized by tech companies themselves rather than exported to the American people.
All right.